Dad, drink this. It was your mother's favorite wine. My older son smiled as he raised his glass at my 68th birthday party. Friends, neighbors, and former colleagues filled the room, cheering as I drank. 30 minutes later, my legs gave out, and everything went dark. When I woke up, I was alone in a freezing mountain forest, confused and terrified. But the scariest part wasn't how I got there. It was the secret waiting inside a hidden cave nearby. Thank you for being here. Truly. You did not have to stay, but you did, and that matters. Tell me in the comments, what city, what country are you joining from today? Let's see how far this story travels. This story contains fictional elements crafted for storytelling purposes. Names and locations are coincidental, but the message woven through every word that was written for you. The evening of September 15th, 2025 arrived. The way most Tuesday evenings do, in the mountains of western North Carolina, quietly without ceremony, the Blue Ridge folding itself into shadow, while the temperature dropped 10 degrees in the space of an hour. I remember noticing the cold through the upstairs window while I adjusted my collar in the bathroom mirror, thinking that 68 had a particular sound to it, heavier than 67, more deliberate. Like a door closing somewhere far down a hallway. Derek knocked before I finished the thought. "Dad?" His voice came through the wood, smooth, measured, the voice of a man who had spent 15 years arguing real estate cases in front of North Carolina judges, some of whom had once sat beside me on the bench. "Everyone's downstairs. Walter's been here 20 minutes and he's already into your good bourbon. Tell him I said to slow down," I called back. "And tell him I'm coming." I heard him walk away without answering. I took one more look at the man in the mirror. Gray at the temples, deeper lines around the eyes than I remembered from last year's birthday. But the posture still good, the jaw still set. Eleanor used to say I carried myself like a man who had never learned to apologize for taking up space. I took that as a compliment. I still do. Downstairs, the dining room had the particular warmth of a house that hasn't been full in a while, suddenly remembering what it was built for. My neighbors from the properties along the ridge had come along with 3 retired colleagues from my years on the Buncombe County Circuit Court, and people from the Presbyterian Church on Merriman Avenue where I'd attended services since Marcus was in diapers. The table held more food than 8 people needed. Someone had brought a sweet potato pie from the bakery on Lexington, and the sight of it nearly undid me because Eleanor had made that exact pie every September for 31 years. Walter Simmons was standing near the fireplace with a glass of my Woodford Reserve, looking exactly like what he was, a 70-year-old former private investigator who had never quite figured out how to retire. Big through the shoulders, even now, white beard trimmed close eyes that moved around a room, the way a hawk's do, cataloging exits and entrances out of 30 years of professional habit. We'd been friends since our 40s, back when I was a young judge, and he was testifying in my courtroom as an expert witness on surveillance evidence. He had trusted me with things I'd never told another soul, and I had done the same. "There he is," Walter said, raising the glass. 68 years old and still the most stubborn man in Buncombe County. 68 and still capable of cutting you off from my liquor cabinet, I told him, and the room laughed. Marcus was in the kitchen doorway. My younger son, 37, with his mother's dark eyes and none of her ease, a man who moved through the world as though he was always slightly braced for impact. He'd lost 2 businesses since 2022, a landscaping company first, and then a restaurant supply venture that collapsed when a major client pulled out without warning. I had helped him the first time without condition. The second time I had sat across from him at this same dining room table and told him that money was not what he needed from me, that what he needed was to find out whether he could stand up without someone catching him first. He had not taken that well. The phone calls had thinned out. The visits had stopped. "Marcus," I said, crossing to him. "Glad you came." He looked at me for a moment, with that expression I had never quite learned to read, part guilt, part something else, something pressed down so hard it had no name left. "Yeah," he said. "Of course, Dad." Derek materialized at my elbow, the way he always did, appearing rather than arriving, as though he'd been standing there slightly longer than I'd realized. He was holding a glass of red wine, deep garnet, in the low dining room light. "From the vineyard outside Hendersonville," he said, pressing it into my hand. "The one you and Mom used to go to. They sent 2 cases up last week." I looked at the glass. The color was right. The smell, when I raised it, was exactly what it should be: dry. A little smoky, the particular character of mountain-grown Cabernet that Eleanor had loved, and that I had kept ordering every year because stopping felt like a surrender I wasn't ready to make. "Thank you," I said. Derek smiled. It was a good smile. It always had been. "To Dad," he said, raising his own glass. The room followed. "To Arthur," Walter said, and his voice had the warmth of a man who meant it absolutely. I drank. The evening settled into itself, the way good evenings do, loose and unhurried old stories told again to people who already knew them, the laughter coming easier as the night wore on. Around 8 o'clock, Walter steered me toward the corner near the bookcase, lowering his voice the way he did when he had something to say that wasn't for general consumption. "Your boy Derek called me last week," he said. I kept my expression neutral. 30 years on the bench teaches you that. "About what?" Walter's jaw worked for a moment. "He had questions about your estate, the deed on the property, whether I knew if you'd updated your will recently." He paused. I told him nothing. But I'm telling you, something moved in my chest, not quite alarm, not quite surprise, something colder than either. "That's not a conversation he should be having with you, Walter." "No," Walter agreed. "It isn't." Before I could say anything further, Marcus appeared at my shoulder. He was holding another glass of wine, the same deep garnet, the same vineyard label on the neck of the bottle he carried. "Derek wanted to make sure you had a refill," he said. His voice was flat. His eyes were somewhere slightly left of mine. I looked across the room. Derek was watching from near the kitchen door, arms folded, wearing that same steady smile. I took the glass. Later, I would turn that moment over and over in my mind, the way you worry a stone in your pocket. The weight of it. The particular smoothness of a decision made in a fraction of a second. The absolute ordinariness of a son handing his father a glass of wine at a birthday dinner. There was nothing to see. That was the whole point. They had made it so there was nothing to see. By 9:30, the room had changed, not visibly. The candles were still burning, the conversation still running from corner to corner. But something in the center of my field of vision had softened the edges of things, thickening, as though the air itself had developed a slight resistance. I reached for the back of a chair and found it later than I expected. Walter was beside me before I fully understood I needed him to be. His hand closed around my arm, firm and certain. "Arthur." His voice came from too far away. "Arthur, what's wrong?" "Something's—" I started. My tongue felt wrong in my mouth, too large, working against a current I couldn't see. "Walter, something is—" I reached for him and found nothing solid. The dining room ceiling tilted 30 degrees to the left. The candles smeared into soft yellow lines. The last thing I saw before the floor came up was Marcus. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, exactly where he'd been all evening, both hands pressed flat against the wall behind him, his face the color of old ash. His mouth was slightly open. His eyes were fixed on me with an expression that was not surprise. He had known this was coming. Even through the thick, gray wave pulling me under, I understood that. Marcus had known, and he had stood in his doorway and watched and done nothing. And that was a kind of answer to a question I hadn't known I was asking until right then. Then the gray took everything, and the birthday was over. Cold was the first thing. Not the manageable kind, the kind that presses itself through fabric and skin and finds the marrow and settles there with the patience of something that has been waiting a long time. I became aware of it before I understood where I was, before I registered the wet leaves against my cheek, or the particular darkness of a forest before dawn, or the fact that my dress shoes were soaked clean through to the sock. I pushed myself to hands and knees. The world lurched. I held position head down, jaw locked, breathing through my nose until the spinning slowed enough to work against. Sometime in the early hours of September 16th, I was in the woods. Real woods, second-growth hardwood, climbing a steep slope in every direction, oak and tulip, poplar and hickory, rising 40 feet overhead, the pre-dawn darkness complete, except for a faint gray suggestion of light bleeding in from the east. Wind moved through the upper canopy. Down here, the air was absolutely still. "All right," I said to the dark, and the sound of my own voice confirmed two things: I was alive, and I was still capable of decision. "Think, Arthur. Think." No phone. No wallet. A folded handkerchief and a peppermint candy from the foyer dish that was the full inventory of Arthur Hayes after 68 years of living. I stood up. My legs held. That was the first piece of good news I'd had in several hours. I moved uphill. Higher ground meant orientation. Orientation meant survival. Survival meant everything else. The rain started 40 minutes later, a slow, punishing autumn rain that turned the slope into a mudslide and reduced visibility to 15 feet. I was soaked within minutes, the dress shirt plastered cold against my chest, the $300 shoes making a sound like a bad joke against the wet rock. I kept moving because stopping was a decision I refused to make. I almost walked past the entrance entirely. The rock face emerged from the vegetation at a place where the slope folded back on itself, a limestone outcrop bearded with moss, half hidden behind a curtain of rhododendron so dense it looked like solid wall. I was edging along the base of it when my outstretched hand found nothing where solid rock should have been. I stopped. I pushed the rhododendron aside. The cave mouth was low. I had to duck sharply to clear it, but it opened into a space with immediate depth, the ceiling rising to 7 feet at the center, the floor dry and flat. I stepped inside and stood still, letting my eyes adjust. The smell hit me first. Beneath the mineral cold of deep limestone, something else: old fabric machine oil, the particular staleness of a space that had been closed and occupied and then closed again for a long time. Not the smell of an empty cave. The smell of a place that had been used. I moved deeper. My eyes were adjusting. And then my foot struck something solid on the floor that rang with a hollow metallic sound. I crouched down. My hand found a metal shelf unit, industrial, bolted to the cave wall, and on it, stacked in precise military order, a row of olive green tins. I lifted one. The label was partially faded, but legible: high-calorie emergency ration. Manufactured 2019. "Well," I said softly, and my voice bounced off the walls in a way that suggested the space was considerably larger than I'd initially assessed. Someone was planning ahead. I moved along the shelf. More ration tins. A canvas bag that clinked when I shifted it. I opened it and found 4 hand-crank flashlights, the kind that need no batteries. Military surplus by the look of them. I took one, cranked the handle for 30 seconds, and the LED beam cut across the cave with shocking brightness. What I saw made me take 2 involuntary steps backward. The cave was not one space. It was 2. The front chamber where I stood was perhaps 20 feet wide and 15 deep, with the shelf unit and a folding camp table and 3 metal chairs arranged with the purposeful tidiness of a place that had served as a meeting room. Beyond the front chamber, a natural passage in the limestone opened into a second, larger space. Or it had, because the passage was now half blocked by a collapse, a mass of limestone slabs and rubble that had come down from the ceiling with the kind of finality that does not invite argument. The collapse had happened some time ago. The dust had long since settled. Whatever had been on the other side of that rock fall was still on the other side. I moved the flashlight beam slowly across the collapse. Between two of the larger fallen slabs in a gap approximately 18 inches wide, I could see the edge of something. Dark leather. Brass hardware catches on two corners. The handle of a large suitcase or case of some kind lying on its side, partially pinned under a slab that had come down at an angle and wedged rather than crushed. I held the flashlight beam on it for a long time without moving. Then I looked at the collapsed passage more carefully. The largest slab, the one that had fallen across the opening, was limestone, maybe 400 pounds, beyond my ability to shift alone. But the gap between two of the secondary falls was 18 inches wide, and the rubble floor of the passage dropped about 14 inches before leveling again. I was a 68-year-old man in a ruined birthday shirt, but I had spent enough years on a working farm to understand the geometry of tight spaces and leverage. "Eleanor," I said quietly, "I hope you're not watching this particular part." I got down onto my stomach on the cave floor, pushed the flashlight through the gap ahead of me, and began to work myself through the collapse. It took 11 minutes and cost me the remaining structural integrity of the left knee of my dress trousers and a long scrape along my right forearm that bled more than it warranted. But I got through. The second chamber was larger than the first, perhaps 30 feet across the ceiling, vaulting to 10 feet at the center. And it had been the main operational space. I could see that immediately. More shelving units. A folding table with a shortwave radio on it, dead and dusty. 3 sleeping bags rolled and stacked against the far wall. And on the floor, spread across 6 feet of cave floor near the back wall, the reason the sliding slab had not fully crushed the case, 3 men. Or what remained of 3 men. They had been here long enough that what remained was beyond grief and beyond horror, and into something that registered only as fact. 3 people had been in this cave when the ceiling came down, and they had not gotten out. The collapse had been partial, the front chamber untouched. The passage blocked these 3 caught in the second chamber, without exit. I stood with the flashlight for a moment, and said, because it seemed the right thing to say, to whoever they had been, "I'm sorry." Then I turned to the suitcase. It was a hard-shell case, the kind with combination locks and reinforced corners, the kind designed to survive rough handling. The slab had come down across the top and cracked the upper shell, but had not penetrated it. The combination locks were set to 0. I tried 000 on both. They opened. Inside I found 3 things. The first was money. Bundled U.S. currency $100 bills organized in rubber-banded stacks. I did not count it then. There was a lot of it. The second was a velvet roll, the kind jewelers use, about 14 inches long. I unrolled it on the cave floor. Gold. Not coins, small bars, the kind that fit in a palm, each one stamped with a weight and a purity mark. 7 of them. I sat back on my heels and stared at what was in front of me. And then I found the third thing, a brown accordion folder, the expandable kind, with a tie closure fat with papers. I pulled the tie loose and opened it on the cave floor and put the flashlight beam on the first page. At the top of the page, in clean printed type, service agreement and payment schedule. Below that, 2 parties. The first was a company name I did not recognize. The second was a name I recognized immediately. Derek J. Hayes. My hands went completely still on the paper. My chest stopped moving for a full 3 seconds. Outside the cave, the rain continued its indifferent work against the mountain. "Derek," I said to the cave walls, to the dead flashlight batteries that weren't dead, to the 3 men who had died in this chamber, and would have been very surprised to learn who had just crawled through their rockfall to read their files. "Derek, what did you do before the birthday party?" I sat on the floor of that second chamber for a long time, before I could make my hands work properly enough to turn the pages. The flashlight beam held steady, the hand crank unit was good for 30 minutes on a full charge, and I had cranked it twice more since coming through the collapse. The rain outside had deepened into a steady roar against the mountain. In here, the sound was reduced to a low continuous hum, like the cave itself was breathing. "All right," I said to the accordion folder. "All right, let's do this properly." I pulled the first document fully into the light and read it the way I had read evidence for 40 years, without rushing, without skipping ahead, without letting what I feared I would find shape what I actually saw. The service agreement was dated February 14th, 2025, 7 months before my birthday party. The company on the first line was registered in Georgia, a name that sounded like a property management firm, but was clearly not. The agreement described in language that was careful enough to sound almost legitimate a set of services to be rendered persuasion and compliance facilitation regarding the voluntary transfer of real property assets. The property was described by address and parcel number. Hayes Estate, my home, my 15 acres. The payment schedule listed 3 tranches. The first $75,000 marked as paid on February 14th. The second $75,000 contingent on successful completion of Phase 1. The third $100,000 on final transfer documentation. I set the page down. I pressed both hands flat against the cold cave floor. I breathed. "February," I said. "You started this in February, Derek. 7 months before you put something in my wine." My voice was very quiet and very steady, the way voices get when the emotion behind them is too large and too cold to come out as anything but controlled sound. "The birthday party was your backup plan, wasn't it? Someone else tried first." I turned to the next section of the accordion folder. Photographs, printed on standard paper, slightly pixelated in the way that surveillance photographs are when taken at distance with a long lens. The first showed me coming out of the courthouse on what I recognized as a Tuesday afternoon in late March. I could tell by the angle of the light and the fact that I was carrying the blue folder I only used for Tuesday docket reviews. In the photograph, I was walking toward my car in the parking structure. Behind me, perhaps 40 feet back, 2 men I had never consciously noticed were walking in the same direction. "You had me followed," I said. "For how long?" The next photograph was dated April 3rd. My front driveway. 2 men at the gate intercom. I remembered that day I had been in the back garden and heard the intercom, but by the time I reached the front, the gate camera showed nobody there. I had assumed it was a wrong address. It had not been a wrong address. The photographs continued. 8 of them in total. Then a printed transcript, 4 pages, the header, showing a date of April 9th, 2025, and the notation, audio recording interior vehicle. I began to read the transcript aloud, because reading it in my own voice was the only way to make it real. Voice 1. "The old man won't answer the gate. We've been out there 3 times. Voice 2. Derek said, "Use the Merriman property entrance. There's a back access through the tree line." Voice 1. "And if he calls the cops." Voice 2. "He's not going to call the cops. Derek said he's too proud. He'll think he can handle it himself." Voice 1. "What exactly are we supposed to say to him?" Voice 2. "We don't say anything. We show him the paperwork Derek prepared, and we tell him if he doesn't sign, things get difficult for the people he cares about." I stopped reading. My jaw was clenched so tight I could feel it in my skull. "You sent men to my house," I said. My voice cracked on the last word, cracked hard and clean, and I did not try to stop it. "You sent men to my home, Derek, to threaten me, in April, while you were calling me every Sunday and asking how my garden was doing and whether I needed anything." The crack widened into something raw. "Every Sunday. You called me every Sunday." I pressed my fist against my mouth and held it there. The transcript continued. Voice 2 described 3 attempted approaches, the gate intercom, twice one approach, through the Merriman tree line that I had apparently interrupted by coming outside at the wrong moment, causing them to withdraw. The final entry in the transcript was dated April 23rd. Client advised to suspend approach. Subject to alert. Alternative method under discussion. Alternative method. That was what the birthday party had been. The alternative method. I read the remaining pages. A second payment receipt, the $75,000 second tranche, dated May 1st, with a note, partial completion, primary objective, not achieved. Goodwill payment, per agreement terms. A brief typed summary of the failed approaches. And at the very bottom of the folder, a single handwritten note on plain paper that had been folded 3 times. The handwriting was Derek's. I had been reading his handwriting for 35 years. If the direct approach continues to fail, we move to Plan B. No more outside parties. Cleaner that way. M is already on board for the party logistics. M. Marcus, my younger son, had been on board since before the birthday party was ever planned. The cave was very quiet around me. The rain had softened outside to a steady drip from the rhododendron. I sat on the floor of a limestone chamber with 3 dead men and an open suitcase and 30 pages of evidence that my oldest son had spent 7 months engineering my destruction through 2 separate plans, and I breathed, and I breathed, and I breathed. Then I picked up the accordion folder and looked at the money and the gold and made a decision that I believe was the correct one, not because it was easy, but because 40 years on the bench had taught me that the correct decision and the easy decision almost never live at the same address. I'm not touching the money, I said, and I'm not touching the gold. That stays exactly where it is because the day this reaches a federal courtroom, I need every item in this suitcase to be exactly where I found it accounted for and photographed by someone with proper authorization. I closed the accordion folder and set it carefully back in the case. What I am taking is the evidence, the documents, because those belong to me in a way that the money does not. I removed the accordion folder from the case. I left the money. I left the gold. I closed the lid and engaged the combination locks and pushed the case back against the far wall exactly as I had found it. Then I gathered 3 of the emergency ration tins from the front chamber shelf, both remaining hand-crank flashlights, and the 1 sleeping bag that was still sealed in its original compression sack. I carried them through the gap in the rock fall, considerably easier going out than coming in, and arranged them in the front chamber. I sat down on a metal chair that had not been sat in for what I estimated was several years, and opened one of the ration tins and ate what was inside without tasting any of it. Outside, the rain continued, February to September. I said to the cave, to the mountain, to whatever was listening. 7 months, Derek. 2 plans. Outside contractors and then family. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, you called me every Sunday. My eyes were burning so badly, I had to press the heels of both hands against them. Not crying. Not yet. The anger was holding everything else in place like a dam holds water, and I was grateful for the anger, because without it, I would have been in pieces on a cave floor in Pisgah National Forest, and that was not a useful place to be. I needed to be useful. I opened the accordion folder again, and began reading from the beginning this time, making a mental index. By the time the light outside the rhododendron had gone from gray to pale gold, I had it memorized. Then I heard it down through the trees, carried on the morning air, with the particular clarity that still mountain air gives to sound. A vehicle engine. A radio. And in the broken fragments that the wind brought up the slope, 2 words that hit me like a physical blow. Arthur Hayes. My hands closed on the accordion folder and held it so tightly the cardboard bent. Whatever they were saying about me down there, I was completely certain it was not the truth. I was at the cave entrance with the rhododendron pushed aside 2 inches before the last syllable of my name had finished carrying up the slope. A Buncombe County Sheriff's vehicle sat on the fire road. Below passenger door, open, a deputy leaning against the hood with a radio pressed to his ear. The wind shifted and brought his words up in pieces. Hayes missing since last night. Family reports expand search grid into Sector 4. The search teams were in Sector 3. Derek had made sure of that he controlled every statement given to the sheriff's office, every coordinate submitted to the search coordinator. Sector 4 remained untouched because the man who knew I was here had told them to look somewhere else. I let the rhododendron fall back and sat down on the metal chair inside the cave entrance and pressed both hands against my knees and thought with the particular focused intensity that I had spent 40 years developing in courtrooms, not thinking about how I felt, not yet, but thinking about what I knew and what it meant and what I needed to do next. "He reported me missing," I said. Of course he did. A man disappears from his birthday party, and his family doesn't call it in. That gets investigated. Derek needed the search teams out here, so that when they find a body, it looks like a natural conclusion. I paused. Except they're not going to find a body, because the body is sitting in a cave in Sector 4 reading a service agreement dated February 14th. I opened the accordion folder on my knees and looked at the first page again. 7 months. I needed to understand the full timeline because the timeline was the foundation of everything else. February, I said, working through it aloud, the way I had always worked through complex cases, speaking to hear the logic, catching the flaws in my own reasoning before they became flaws in the argument. Derek hires outside contractors in February, uses a Georgia LLC to disguise the payment, sends men to the estate in April, 3 attempts all unsuccessful, pays them a goodwill fee in May, and terminates the arrangement. I tapped the folder. Then switches to Plan B, the birthday party. Marcus already on board by the time the party is planned, which means Derek spent the gap between May and September recruiting Marcus, finding the $90,000 debt, applying the leverage, converting his brother from a bystander to a participant. I stood up and started pacing 4 steps to the far wall, 4 back the way I paced my study. "The men in the second chamber," I said. "The 3 who died in the collapse. They're the contractors, or some of them. The collapse happened when the dust was thoroughly settled. The rock oxidation suggests months, not years. My guess sometime between May and August after Derek terminated the agreement." I stopped pacing. Derek terminated the contract, and then the contractors died in a cave collapse before they could be any kind of liability. That timing is, I don't know if that's Derek being extraordinarily lucky or extraordinarily thorough. I genuinely do not know. That thought sat in the room with me for a moment, and I let it sit because a judge who refuses to consider the worst possible version of events is a judge who makes bad rulings. Either way, I said the evidence they were keeping as leverage against Derek is still here, because they were keeping it here, and then they died here. I looked at the accordion folder. They kept the service agreement, the photographs, the transcripts, and the payment records, because that was their insurance policy. If Derek ever tried to expose them or refuse payment, they had documentation of his involvement. I almost laughed. And instead of protecting them, it protected me. I sat back down. The practical situation was this. I had an accordion folder containing 30 pages of evidence that Derek Hayes had conspired twice to strip me of my property and my life. I had a cave with enough emergency rations to last 6 to 8 weeks if I was careful. I had 2 hand-crank flashlights. I had 1 sealed sleeping bag. I had the sleeping bag from the front chamber that was old but functional. I had no phone, no means of communication, and no shoes worth the description. I also had something I had not expected to have when I woke up on wet leaves the night before. I had more evidence than Derek knew existed. He thought the contractors were dead, and the evidence was gone. He had no reason to search this cave because he believed the cave had killed his problem for him. The waterproof case he and Raymond Holt had used as a dead drop, the one I had found on the outer cave floor the first night that he might eventually miss. But the accordion folder from the suitcase in the collapsed chamber, Derek did not know those documents had survived. He could not know. "You thought the mountain cleaned up after you," I said quietly. You thought the cave buried your first plan, along with the men you paid to execute it. You thought you were starting fresh with the birthday party, with no trail connecting you to what came before. I set the accordion folder on the camp table and looked at it. Derek, you have been a meticulous man your entire career, but you made one catastrophic assumption that dead men don't leave evidence. The folding chair held my weight. The ration tin from breakfast sat empty beside the flashlight. Outside, the sheriff's vehicle had moved further up the fire road, the engine sound fading. I needed Walter. Walter Simmons was the only person alive who would believe me, who had the skills to act on what I had, and who already suspected Derek enough to have warned me at the party. But reaching Walter meant a phone, and a phone meant a signal, and a signal meant a location, and a location meant Derek could narrow a search radius before I had time to prepare. Not yet, I said. Walter can wait 2 more days. In 2 more days, Derek will be comfortable. A man who believes his problem is solved stops watching carefully. Derek will begin moving on the estate. He'll contact Raymond Holt. He'll start behaving like a man who has already won. I looked at the cave wall's dry, solid, patient limestone that had kept this secret for months and would keep it a while longer. And I will be here, reading his documents, eating his contractor's ration tins, and building the case that's going to walk him into a federal courtroom. I picked up the hand-crank flashlight and turned it over in my hands. 2 plans, I said. He had 2 plans, and both of them failed, because the first group of men he trusted with a secret are dead, and the second group— I set the flashlight down. The second group made the mistake of involving Marcus, and Marcus, whatever else he is still my son, and I am not finished being his father, not even close. Outside, the forest had gone quiet, except for the drip of rain off the rhododendron. The late afternoon light was beginning to go gold through the cave entrance. I opened a second ration tin, ate what was in it, and began to plan in earnest. Somewhere in Asheville, a man who thought he had won was about to start making exactly the kind of mistakes that comfortable men make. And somewhere in the Pisgah National Forest, in a cave that had outlasted the men who thought they owned it, a 68-year-old retired judge with a flashlight and a folder full of evidence was getting ready to make him pay for every single one. On the morning of September 18th, I had been awake since 4 o'clock, lying on a bed of bark and dead leaves in a limestone cave in the Pisgah National Forest, staring at a ceiling I could not see in the dark. Running through 31 pages of documented betrayal in my head, the way a lawyer reviews a case file before trial. By the time the first pale light crept through the rhododendron at the cave mouth, I had the contents of that waterproof case memorized in the order I would need to present them. $800,000 in transfers, 17 pages of emails, 1 handwritten blackmail note in Derek's own hand. I knew what I had. What I didn't have was a plan for getting it out of the forest and into the hands of someone who could act on it. That required movement, and movement required knowing what was happening outside these trees. I left the cave at first light, the case tucked under my arm, working my way down the slope through the wet undergrowth. My dress shoes had given up entirely. The leather had cracked and separated from the sole on the right foot, slapping against the ground with every step like a bad joke. My birthday shirt was a wreck. 3 days in the Carolina mountains without a change of clothes will do that. I told myself it didn't matter and mostly believed it. I found a position behind a fallen hickory log at the tree line overlooking the fire road below. Good sight line, good cover. I settled in and waited the way I used to wait for juries, without expectation, without impatience, just present and paying attention. The Forest Service truck came up the road around 7:30. An old Ford pickup, the kind with a busted muffler that announces itself before it arrives. The driver, a trail maintenance worker in the standard green uniform, parked 20 yards below my position, climbed out, set a thermos on the hood, and hung a portable radio from the truck's side mirror. The radio came on. WGUWNC, the Asheville news station. I knew that call sign the way I knew my own name. Eleanor and I had listened to it every morning for 30 years, drinking coffee in the kitchen, while the Blue Ridge turned pink outside the window. I gripped the hickory log and listened. The service is planned this Saturday at Riverside Presbyterian Church for retired Circuit Court Judge Arthur Hayes, 68, of Asheville, reported missing since the evening of September 15th. Family spokesperson Derek Hayes confirmed that search teams have expanded their grid into the Pisgah National Forest sector, but have so far recovered no trace of Judge Hayes. Derek Hayes issued a statement early this morning, requesting prayers from the Asheville community and describing what he called the most devastating loss our family has ever faced. The service will begin at 11 a.m. Memorial donations may be directed to the bark cut into my palms. I was gripping the log so hard my knuckles had gone white and numb, and I didn't notice until the pain worked its way through the shock. The most devastating loss our family has ever faced. Devastating, I said very quietly into the wood grain of that hickory log. The word tasted like something spoiled left too long in a warm room. The most devastating loss. Derek, you wrote that statement yourself, didn't you? You sat down at your desk, my desk probably in my study, and you drafted it the same way you draft a legal brief. Word choice deliberate. Tone calibrated for maximum sympathy. Every comma in the right place. My eyes were burning so badly, I had to press my forehead against the bark. A heat built up behind them that had nowhere to go. And for a moment, just a moment, I let it come. 3 days alone in a forest after being drugged and left to die by your own sons will eventually find a crack in whatever wall you've built, and the crack found me right there, face against a dead hickory log on a September Thursday morning, while a radio told a maintenance worker about my memorial service. Saturday, I said, lifting my head. I pressed the back of my hand against my eyes hard. Done. Moving on. They planned it for Saturday, 4 days after I disappeared. I did the calculation automatically the way a judge does. North Carolina law requires a court order for a presumption of death. That process takes months, not days. So this Saturday is not legal procedure. This Saturday is a performance. The maintenance worker poured coffee from his thermos, checked his phone completely, unaware that the subject of the radio segment was lying behind a log 20 yards uphill from him, working through the logical architecture of his own memorial service. It's a stage, I said, keeping my voice barely above a breath. You need Asheville to see Derek Hayes standing at a podium inside Riverside Presbyterian, weeping over his father. You need my courthouse colleagues in those pews. You need the neighbors from the Ridge. You need the people from the church who've known me for 30 years to watch you perform grief so convincingly that when your name goes before the Judicial Nominations Committee, every one of them will write a character reference that says, Derek Hayes is a man of integrity and family devotion. I sat back on my heels. Both knees screamed. I ignored them. The Court of Appeals, I said slowly, and the full shape of it opened up in front of me, the way a courtroom opens when you finally understand what the case is actually about. The estate money funds the campaign. The grieving son image builds the nomination file. And with my name, my 30 years on the bench, my reputation attached to Derek Hayes as his father, he walks into that hearing room with a legacy behind him that most candidates spend decades trying to build. The fury that moved through my chest was quiet and very cold. You weren't just taking my property, Derek. You were taking my name, my entire career. Everything I spent my life building, you were going to wear it. The radio had moved on to weather. The maintenance worker stretched his arms over his head, yawned, and began gathering his gear for the day's trail work. I stayed behind the log until the truck moved further up the road. Then I stood up, gripped the hickory bark to steady myself on legs that were not entirely trustworthy, and made a decision that settled over me with the particular weight of something irrevocable. I was going to stay dead. You planned a memorial service for a living man, I said to the empty tree line, to Derek's face in my memory, to the station playing weather reports down on that fire road. You spent 4 months engineering this. 5 wire transfers, a fake LLC, 17 pages of emails you thought would never see daylight. I picked up the waterproof case and held it against my side. All right. I will give you your memorial service. I will give you your stage and your podium and your devastating grief. Every minute you spend believing I am gone is a minute you are not watching me. I turned back up toward the cave and stopped. At the far end of the fire road, where it curved around the base of the ridge and came back into view, through a gap in the trees, a second vehicle had appeared. It had not been there 10 minutes ago. Dark blue, older model, moving slowly the way a vehicle moves when the driver is watching the tree line rather than the road. A Buncombe County Retired Law Enforcement Association sticker on the rear bumper. My heart seized and then slammed back into rhythm so hard it knocked the breath out of me. I knew that car. I had ridden in that car to more fishing spots and courthouse lunches and late-night conversations than I could count. Walter. I breathed, and the word came out wrecked and grateful and completely undignified, and I did not care even slightly. I dropped back behind the hickory log and pressed myself flat, heart hammering, like I was 30 years younger and considerably more foolish. Walter's Buick rolled to a stop 50 yards down the fire road. The engine cut. The door opened. He climbed out slowly. Walter always moved slowly now, the knees that had ended his career making every exit from a vehicle into a minor negotiation, and stood with both hands on the roof of the car, scanning the tree line with the systematic patience of a man who had spent 3 decades being paid to find things that did not want to be found. He was carrying a folded topographic map and a thermos. He was wearing his old brown field jacket, the one with the torn left pocket he had refused to have repaired for 15 years, because Eleanor had sewn a patch on the inside as a joke. I pressed my fist against my mouth. "Walter," I whispered into the bark of the log, "you stubborn, beautiful old man." He spread the topo map on the hood of the Buick and bent over it, tracing ridgelines with one thick finger. Then he straightened up, looked directly at the section of tree line where I was hiding, and called out in a voice that carried like he was still testifying in a courtroom. "Arthur, if you're up there, I want you to know I've been driving these roads since 5 this morning, and my knees are killing me, and I'd appreciate it if you'd stop making me work this hard." I didn't move. "I'm not with the search teams," Walter continued, crossing his arms against the cold. "I'm not with the sheriff. I told Dorothy I was going fishing, which she didn't believe, but she let me go anyway, because she knows me well enough to know when something's wrong." He paused. "Something is wrong, and I don't think it has anything to do with you getting lost." Still, I waited. 3 minutes. 5. Walter poured coffee from his thermos, leaned against the hood, and waited right back. Because Walter Simmons had more patience than any man I had ever known, and he had learned it, he always said, from watching me run a courtroom. Finally, I stood up from behind the log. Walter saw me. His whole body went rigid, not surprise exactly, but the physical shock of a thing you believed and hoped colliding with a thing you can actually see. His coffee thermos tilted, and he grabbed it just before it went over the hood. "Arthur." His voice cracked straight down the middle. "Arthur, you're alive," I said, coming down through the tree line on unsteady legs, catching a branch, releasing it. "Considerably worse for wear, but alive." Walter crossed the distance between us in half the time his knees should have allowed, and grabbed me by both arms, and his grip was so hard and so desperate that it hurt, and I didn't care even slightly. "You look terrible," he said, and his eyes were glassy and bright, and his jaw was working like a man trying to hold his face together by force of will alone. "I know," I said. My own throat had gone tight enough that the words came out rough. Walter, listen to me. I don't have much time to explain, and you can't tell anyone you found me. Not the sheriff, not the search teams, nobody. He searched my face for a long moment, reading it the way he'd always been able to read evidence, not what it said, but what it meant. Derek, he said. It wasn't a question. Derek, I confirmed, and Raymond Holt. Walter's expression changed. The worry shifted into something harder, something with decades of professional certainty behind it. I knew it, he said, and his voice dropped low. Arthur, I have suspected Derek for 4 months. I had no proof. I tried to build a case and I had nothing that would hold. I stared at him. 4 months, since May. Walter released my arms and pressed one hand over his eyes, a gesture of exhaustion so complete it nearly broke me. He came to my house in May, said he was worried about your cognitive decline, said he'd noticed you making mistakes with finances. He wanted my read on whether you'd be open to, he used the phrase, transitional estate planning. Walter dropped his hand and looked at me directly. I told him to get out of my house, and then I started making calls. But I had nothing concrete, nothing I could take to anyone. I have concrete, I said. My voice came out harder than I intended. I have 31 pages of concrete. Bank transfers, conspiracy emails, a blackmail note he wrote to Marcus in his own handwriting. Walter made a sound I had never heard from him before, somewhere between a laugh and a sob startled out of him before he could stop it. He pressed his knuckles against his mouth. Where? Waterproof case. Found it in a cave up on the ridge. I gestured behind me. Walter, he left evidence in a cave he apparently used as a dead drop with Raymond Holt. He left it there because he believed no one would ever find it. He certainly didn't believe I would. Oh, Lord. Walter closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet at the corners, and he made no effort to hide it. Oh, Lord Arthur. I need you to pull the LLC registration for Blue Ridge Horizon Properties from the Secretary of State database, I said. Public record takes you 10 minutes. I need to know every name on the filing and every address associated with it. Done. Walter nodded, jaw set. What else? Raymond Holt has a contact in the county medical examiner's office. I don't know who. I need you to find out who without Raymond knowing you're looking. I have a friend in the ME's office, Walter said immediately. Played golf with him for 12 years. I can make a call that doesn't raise flags. Good. I grabbed his arm. Walter, the memorial service, Saturday at Riverside Presbyterian. Something crossed Walter's face, pain sharp and quick. I know. I was asked to speak. His voice thickened. I was going to speak about you in the past tense, Arthur. At your own memorial. Do you understand what that I have been? I did not sleep 3 nights in a row because I could not make myself believe you were gone, but I had no evidence that you weren't. His voice broke on the last word. Fully broke. Walter Simmons, who had testified in murder trials without flinching, who had described crime scenes with the steady delivery of a man made of stone, stood on a fire road in Pisgah National Forest, with tears running freely down into his white beard, and made no attempt whatsoever to stop them. I grabbed him by the shoulder, hard. Don't you speak at that memorial, I said. Let Derek have his stage. Let him stand at that podium and perform his grief in front of every person I ever knew in this county. Let him build that reputation. Because I am going to need every one of those people in a courtroom when this is over, and I need them to remember exactly how devastated he claimed to be. Walter wiped his face with the back of his hand, took a breath, then another. His jaw squared back up. You're going to let him bury you. I'm going to let him believe he buried me, I said. There's a difference. And Walter... I tightened my grip on his shoulder. He's going for the Court of Appeals appointment. That's what this is really about. The estate money funds the campaign. The morning sun image builds the reputation. Derek does not just want my property, he wants my bench. Walter stared at me for a long, full second. Then a sound came out of him that was not a laugh and not a curse word, but contained elements of both. He pressed both hands flat against the roof of his Buick and leaned there head down, processing it. Derek Hayes, he said slowly, wants to sit on the North Carolina Court of Appeals. Yes, I said. Walter lifted his head. His eyes had gone from wet to something else entirely, the sharp, cold, particular look of a man who has just understood the full dimensions of what he is dealing with and has decided without ceremony to deal with it. Then we'd better make sure, Walter said, that when he walks into that courtroom for his appointment hearing, he walks into a room that's already been prepared for him. Walter came back to the cave on the morning of September 20th, 2 days after our first meeting on the fire road, and he came back with a manila folder tucked under his arm and the look of a man who had not slept particularly well but had used the waking hours productively. I heard his car on the fire road before I saw him. I was already at the cave entrance, pushing the rhododendron aside when he came up through the tree line, moving faster than his knees should have permitted. "Sit down," he said before I could say anything. "I have a lot to tell you, and I need you to hear all of it before you start reacting." "When have I ever reacted before thinking?" I asked. "September 15th, Walter said. "You drank the wine." That landed. I sat down on the rock shelf near the cave entrance and gestured for him to continue. He opened the manila folder on his knee. Blue Ridge Horizon Properties, LLC, filed with the NC Secretary of State on March 3, 2025. Registered agent a paralegal named Susan Briggs, who works out of a shared office suite on Merriman Avenue and files paperwork for about 40 different LLCs without asking many questions about any of them. He tapped the page. Managing members listed Raymond Holt, 61% interest. Derek Hayes, 39%. My jaw tightened. "His name is on the filing." "His name is on the filing," Walter confirmed. In plain black ink. He was careful about the emails, but he got comfortable with the corporate structure. Lawyers always do. They trust paper. They've written themselves. He turned to the next page. The LLC has a registered business address in Charlotte. The address belongs to a mail forwarding service. So the entity exists, it files, it receives wire transfers, and it has no physical presence anywhere. Shell within a shell, I said. The Charlotte firm is a second layer. Exactly. I pulled the Charlotte entity too, took me most of yesterday. Walter's jaw tightened. It connects to a third company registered in Delaware. But here's where it gets interesting. The Delaware entity has a sole member listed a trust. The Hayes Family Revocable Trust, established 2019. The air went out of me. That's my trust. Eleanor and I set that up the year before she died. I know, Walter said quietly. Derek is funneling money through a chain that terminates in a trust bearing your name. If anyone ever traced it, the paper trail would point directly at you, at Arthur Hayes, the man who supposedly set up and controlled the origin of the funds. The fury that moved through me was so clean and so cold, it almost felt like calm. Almost. My hands were shaking against my knees, and I pressed them flat to stop it. "He framed me," I said. "While planning to kill me, he built a paper trail that would make me look like the criminal if anything unraveled. That's what I believe, yes." Walter closed the folder. "Arthur, I also spoke to my contact in the medical examiner's office. Carefully, I told him I was asking about general protocol for missing persons cases, nothing specific." He paused, and the pause had weight. "The deputy M.E. assigned to any case involving you, if a body were recovered, is a man named Gerald Sykes. Sykes and Raymond Holt served together on the Buncombe County Development Board from 2018 to 2022. They were close enough that Holt was at Sykes's daughter's wedding. So if they found me dead in this forest," I said, "Gerald Sykes signs the death certificate, Raymond Holt calls in the favor, and the cause of death is stroke or exposure, and nobody asks another question. That is the cleanest version of how it plays, Walter said. He looked at me with the direct, unsparing honesty of a 30-year friendship. Arthur, this plan was thorough. These men spent months on this. If you had not found that case— I know, I said. The words came out flat, because the alternative was something I was not prepared to say out loud. I know, Walter leaned forward. Now tell me about the memorial. What about it? I went. His voice thickened instantly, and he stopped, cleared his throat, pressed on. Saturday morning. Riverside Presbyterian. Every pew full. Your courthouse colleagues, the neighbors, people from the church, everyone you've known in this county for 30 years, Arthur, every one of them was in that building. He stopped again. His jaw was working hard. And Derek stood at that podium in a charcoal suit with a white pocket square, and he talked about you for 12 minutes. About your integrity, your dedication, the kind of father you were. Walter's voice cracked on the last sentence. He pressed 2 fingers against his mouth, breathed through it. He cried. Not too much, just enough. The pocket square came out at exactly the right moment. It was the most polished piece of theater I have seen in 40 years, and every person in that room believed every word of it. My throat tightened until I could feel my pulse in it. And Marcus, Walter's expression shifted. Marcus sat in the front pew and stared at his hands for the entire service. Didn't speak. Didn't look at anyone. When it was over, he walked out a side door before anyone could reach him. Walter looked at me steadily. Arthur, I've been watching people under pressure my entire career. That young man is not holding together. He looked like a man standing on ice that he knows is too thin and is waiting to go through. Something moved in my chest at that not forgiveness, not yet. I wasn't near enough to forgiveness for it to be honest. But something that remembered Marcus at 7 years old, crying over a broken bicycle, unable to explain what was wrong, until I sat with him quietly and waited. Something that was still underneath all of this, his father. He knew, I said. Marcus knew what Derek was planning, and he didn't stop it. I know he did, Walter said. But Derek blackmailed him. The $90,000 note, I know that too, Walter said. Both things are true. He was coerced and he still made a choice. He paused. The question is whether the coercion matters enough to make him useful to us. I looked at Walter for a long moment. The word useful sat between us with its sharp edges showing. Find out where Marcus is staying, I said finally. Don't approach him. Don't let him see you watching. But I need to know what state he's in and whether Derek is keeping him close or keeping him away. Walter nodded. He stood folder under his arm and then stopped. One more thing, he said. Derek gave an interview to the Asheville Citizen-Times on Friday, the day before the memorial. He talked about you, about your legacy. And at the end of the interview, the reporter asked about his professional future. Walter's mouth set in a hard line. Derek said, and I quote, "My father dedicated his life to this state's judicial system. I intend to honor that legacy by continuing his work from the bench." The paper ran it on the front page of the Metro section. My hands, which I had pressed flat against my knees, curled into fists. He's already running, I said. He never stopped, Walter said, and went back down through the trees. Walter came back 4 days later on the morning of September 24th, and I knew from the way he moved up through the tree line faster than usual, his bad knees clearly losing the argument with whatever he'd found, that something had changed. Marcus, he said before he'd fully cleared the rhododendron. You need to hear about Marcus. I straightened up from where I'd been sitting against the cave wall, running through the LLC documents for what was probably the 11th time. Tell me. Walter dropped onto the rock shelf and pressed his hands against his thighs, catching his breath. I've been watching him for 4 days. He's staying at the Aloft Hotel downtown Derek's idea, I think. Keep him somewhere neutral, away from the estate, away from his own apartment. Easier to manage. He looked up at me. Arthur, that boy, is unraveling. I've watched people crack under pressure for 30 years, and I know what the beginning looks like. What did you see? Monday morning, he sat in his car in the hotel parking garage for 2 hours without going anywhere. Just sat there. Walter's voice was careful, measured the voice of a man delivering evidence. Tuesday, I followed him to a diner on Lexington. He ordered coffee, didn't drink it, left cash on the table, and walked out after 8 minutes. Wednesday, he drove to the estate, sat at the end of the driveway for 20 minutes, engine running, and then left without going in. Walter paused. This morning, he drove to Riverside Presbyterian, went inside, stayed 40 minutes. My chest ached. He went to the church. To your memorial service location, Walter said. The church was empty. It's a Wednesday. He sat alone in the building where they held your service, and he stayed for 40 minutes, and when he came out, his face looked like something had been taken apart inside it. Walter's voice finally lost its professional steadiness, dropped lower. I'm not a sentimental man, you know that. But I sat in my car across the street and watched that boy walk out of that church, and I thought that is a man who is trying to say something to someone who isn't there anymore. My eyes burned. I pressed my thumb and forefinger against the bridge of my nose and held the pressure there. He's trying to apologize, I said, to an empty church. That's what it looked like to me. He was blackmailed, I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. Derek had $90,000 of leverage on him, and Marcus has never in his life been strong enough to stand up when the cost was that high. I know that about my son. I've known it since he was 19. The ache in my chest spread and deepened. That doesn't make it right. What he let happen to me is not something I can just... It doesn't disappear because I understand how it happened. But he's your son, Walter said simply. But he's my son, I agreed. The words came out cracked and quiet and entirely honest. Walter leaned forward. Arthur, if Marcus is breaking down, Derek is going to notice. Derek cannot afford Marcus falling apart right now, not while he's building his nomination profile, not while the estate paperwork is in preliminary stages. He'll apply pressure, try to stabilize him. And a frightened man under pressure from 2 directions at once makes mistakes, I finished, or makes a different choice than he made on September 15th. There's something else. Walter pulled a folded newspaper clipping from his jacket pocket and held it out to me. Citizen Times this morning. I unfolded it. A photograph of Derek at a fundraising dinner, black tie, the kind of event that costs $1,000 a plate, shaking hands with 3 men I recognized as members of the NC Judicial Nominating Commission. The caption read, Derek Hayes, son of the late Judge Arthur Hayes, attends Buncombe County Bar Association Gala. The late Judge Arthur Hayes. Late, I said. The word tasted like acid. They're already printing it as fact. No death certificate, no confirmed death, no court order, and the newspaper is calling me late. Derek fed them that language, Walter said, his voice flat with certainty. He controls the narrative. Every statement, every interview, every off-the-record conversation with the press is calibrated. He is running a campaign, Arthur, a real one. The nomination committee dinner was not coincidental. I set the clipping down on the cave floor. My hands were steadier than they had any right to be. I need to talk to Marcus, I said. Walter's head came up sharply. That's a risk. I know it's a risk. I looked at him directly. But Marcus is the only person in this situation who was coerced rather than willing. He's the only one whose choice was made under duress. And right now he's sitting in empty churches trying to apologize to a ghost. My voice hardened. I am not a ghost. And I think it's time Marcus knew that. Walter pressed both hands over his face and dragged them down slowly. If Derek finds out Marcus has made contact with you, then we make sure Derek doesn't find out. I said. Not yet. Not until we're ready. I leaned forward. Walter, can you get Marcus somewhere private? Somewhere Derek isn't watching. Walter dropped his hands. His expression was the one I knew from 30 years of difficult conversations, the one that meant he had already decided yes and was just determining logistics. There's a hiking trail parking lot off Route 276, he said slowly. Remote enough. I could reach Marcus through his personal cell, not the number Derek knows about. Marcus gave me his backup number years ago, back when he was having problems with his first business and didn't want his brother monitoring his calls. Something tightened in my chest, not pain this time, but the particular tension of a plan beginning to take shape. Set it up, I said. But Walter, be careful how you approach him. If Marcus panics and runs to Derek, he won't, Walter said with a quiet certainty that surprised me. I watched that boy for 4 days. He is not running to Derek with anything. He is running from himself. He stood, put his hand briefly on my shoulder. Give me 48 hours. He went back down through the trees, and the forest closed behind him, and I sat with the newspaper clipping in my hand, and the photograph of Derek Hayes shaking hands with the people who were going to give him everything he had built his plan to take. Somewhere across the county, Marcus was driving circles around a life he could no longer look at directly. 48 hours. I could wait 48 hours. Before I take you into that parking lot. Before you hear the sound my son made when he saw a dead man standing in front of him, I want you to comment one thing. I'm still here. 3 words. That is all. Because what comes next is the moment this entire story turns, and I want to know who is walking through it with me. A note. I want to be honest about some details in this story have been shaped for storytelling. Names, places, certain moments adjusted for clarity and meaning. If that matters to you, this is your moment to step away. If it does not, then stay. The best part is just beginning. Walter had chosen the trailhead parking lot off Route 276 because it sat 3 miles from the nearest intersection, backed against a ridgeline that killed cell signal from 2 directions, and on a Tuesday morning, saw perhaps 4 cars between sunrise and noon. He had texted Marcus on the backup number at 6 a.m. Need to speak. Route 276 trailhead. 9 o'clock. Come alone. It concerns your father. Nothing more. I was already positioned behind the trailhead kiosk when Marcus pulled in at 8:53. His car, the gray Honda Civic with the cracked rear bumper I recognized from his last visit to the estate 2 years ago, rolled into the lot and stopped. He sat inside for 4 full minutes before the door opened. I watched through the gap in the kiosk boards and felt something move through my chest that had no clean name, part grief, part the particular ache of a father watching a child who does not know he is being watched. When Marcus finally got out, I saw what Walter had been describing for 4 days. He had lost weight that a man his age should not be able to lose in 10 days. His face had a hollowed, compressed quality skin pulled too tight over the bones beneath. His jacket hung wrong on his shoulders. His hands, when he shoved them into his pockets, were shaking visibly enough that I could see it from 20 feet. He looked like a man being eaten alive from the inside. Walter stepped out from beside the Buick. Marcus crossed the lot, and his voice, when it came, was thin and fractured at the edges. Walter, what is this? Derek doesn't know I'm here. If he finds out, Derek isn't going to find out, Walter said. Not from me. You said it concerns my father. Marcus's voice broke cleanly on the last word, snapped like a green branch under weight. Walter, I need to know, have they found? Marcus, I said. I stepped out from behind the kiosk. The sound Marcus made had no category in human language. It came from somewhere beneath his chest, tore upward through him, and escaped before he could form any shape around it. His legs failed completely. Walter grabbed his arm and kept him off the asphalt, but Marcus's knees still went, and he grabbed Walter's jacket with both fists and held on with the desperate grip of a man who has been falling for 10 days and has finally found something solid. Dad. The word came out in pieces, each syllable separated by a breath that shook. Dad, you're alive, I said. My voice was not as steady as I needed it to be. I crossed the lot toward him. I'm alive, Marcus. He let go of Walter and grabbed me instead, both arms around me, face pressed hard into my shoulder, his entire body shaking with sobs that came up in waves, each one more violent than the last. His hands were fisted in the back of my jacket, and he was crying so hard that his knees kept buckling, and I held him up and held him together and let him cry because he needed to cry, and because whatever else was true, I was still his father. But only some things survive the worst of what people do to each other. I pulled back. I held him by the shoulders and looked at his face, wrecked and red and raw eyes, swollen, nearly shut, jaw trembling. The face of the boy who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. Also the face of the man who had stood in a kitchen doorway and watched me drink poison. Both things were true. I kept both of them present. I need you to tell me everything, I said. Not the version you've been rehearsing. Everything from the beginning in order. Marcus pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. His whole body shuddered once deeply, like something settling after an earthquake. Then he drew a breath and began. Derek came to me in April, he said. He said he was worried about you, that you were making bad financial decisions, that your judgment was slipping. I knew it wasn't true. Dad, I knew. But I let him talk because I didn't understand yet what he was building toward. His voice cracked, and he pushed through it. He told me he had a plan to protect the estate, that it required my cooperation. He said you'd understand eventually, that it was for your own good. And the $90,000, I said. Marcus flinched as though I'd struck him physically. I borrowed it from the business account during the restaurant supply company. I had a repayment plan, I had it written out. I was going to pay it back before the quarterly audit. He stopped. His hands were shaking so badly, he pressed them together in front of him. Derek had the bank records. I don't know how he got them. He came to my apartment in June with a printed statement, and he told me if I didn't cooperate fully, he would show you. He said you would cut me off. He said... A sound escaped him, half sob, half something uglier. He said you would never forgive me. And I believed him because I was so ashamed of the money and so terrified of losing you that Marcus. I needed to ask the question that had been sitting in my chest since I read the accordion folder in the cave. Before April, did Derek ever mention hiring anyone, a company? People he'd brought in from outside to handle the situation before the birthday party. Marcus looked at me with genuine confusion, cutting through the grief. What do you mean, what company? A group of men, I said, possibly based in Georgia. Did Derek ever mention anything like that? Any approach made to the estate before April? Marcus shook his head slowly and with certainty. No, I don't, Dad. I don't know what you're describing. Derek came to me in April. That was the first I knew of any of this. Whatever happened before that... He searched my face. What happened before April? I looked at him for a long moment. The confusion was real. I had spent 40 years reading people in courtrooms, and the confusion on Marcus's face was completely genuine. The confusion of a man encountering a piece of a story he had never been told. Derek had kept the Georgia operation entirely from Marcus, had walled it off completely. Marcus had been recruited only for Plan B, the birthday party, the wine, the logistics of September 15th, with no knowledge that there had ever been a Plan A. It doesn't matter right now, I said. What matters is what you know. Tell me the rest, Marcus told me. The logistics of the birthday party, how Derek had obtained the sedative from my own medicine cabinet during a visit in August, how Marcus had confirmed the vineyard wine was my standard birthday drink, how Derek had coached him on exactly where to stand and what to do when I fell. Marcus told me all of it, with his eyes fixed on mine, and his hands shaking, and his jaw working between sentences, and I stood there and listened and felt the crack in my chest widen with each detail into something that was going to take a very long time to close. "You are my son," I said when he finished. "I love you in a way that does not have an off switch, and nothing that has happened in these mountains has changed that." My voice cracked, and I let it crack. "But you are going to have to stand in a courtroom and answer for what you did, not as punishment, as truth. And I need you to be ready to do that." Marcus straightened, wiped his face. His jaw stopped trembling and set into something firmer. "Yes," he said. "Whatever it takes." "Good." I gripped his shoulders. "Now Derek knows you're unraveling, which means from this moment you cannot let him see any change. Go back to the hotel, answer his calls, be exactly what he expects you to be." "I can do that," Marcus said. "One more thing." I tightened my grip. "Are you certain Derek doesn't know you're here today?" Something shifted in Marcus's expression, a flicker of something worried. "He mentioned 2 days ago that he'd asked someone to keep an eye on Walter. He said Walter was asking questions he didn't like." Walter, standing 5 feet away, went completely still. "He's having you followed," I said. "I think so," Marcus said. "I think it's already started." Walter drove 2 miles down Route 276 before he pulled over, got out of the Buick, and stood beside the road, with his hands on the roof of the car and his head down. I had followed in the tree line parallel to the road, old habit from our conversation about keeping me invisible, and when I came out onto the shoulder beside him, he looked up and said with complete professional composure, "I've been followed for at least 3 days, and I didn't catch it." 30 years in the business, and a 27-year-old in a rental car managed to sit in my blind spot for 72 hours. "Don't," I said. "I'm serious, Arthur. That is embarrassing." "Walter." I put a hand on his arm. "Focus. How much does Derek know?" Walter straightened up. The self-recrimination shut off like a switch thrown. That was what 30 years of professional discipline looked like in practice. "If he's had someone on me for 3 days, he knows I've been driving the Pisgah roads. He knows I've been to the county courthouse public records office. He knows I had coffee with my contact from the medical examiner's office." He paused. "He does not know about the cave. He does not know about Marcus this morning because I chose this location specifically because it has no line of sight from any road." He paused again. "But he knows I am not behaving like a man in mourning. He knows I am behaving like a man building a case." "Which means our timeline just got shorter," I said, "considerably." Walter pulled his phone from his jacket. "I need to change my patterns. Stop going to the same locations. Make the surveillance harder to read." He looked at me directly. "And Arthur, you need to move. Not out of the cave, not yet. But you cannot stay static. If Derek escalates from surveillance to active search, that ridgeline is not as protected as we've been treating it." "Agreed," I said. "What's happening with Raymond Holt?" Walter's expression shifted into something that looked almost like satisfaction. "That is the one genuinely good piece of news I have. 3 days ago, a reporter from the Asheville Citizen-Times filed a public records request on Blue Ridge Horizon Properties. She's writing a piece about LLC opacity in North Carolina real estate, nothing to do with us, completely unrelated investigation. But Raymond Holt's name appears on that filing, and his name is going to appear in print in connection with a story about shell companies and financial opacity." Walter met my eyes. "Raymond doesn't know the reporter isn't specifically targeting him. But he's scared enough that he's behaving like she is." I felt something shift in my chest, the particular sensation of a plan that has been patient beginning to move. "How do you know he's scared?" "Because he called Derek 4 times in 2 days, Walter said. "I don't have the content of the calls. I'm not in the business of illegal wiretapping. And I want every piece of this to be clean when it reaches a courtroom." But Marcus told me Derek came home from a call on Tuesday night, visibly furious. Threw something in the kitchen. Marcus heard it through the wall of the estate. Raymond is pushing Derek to accelerate, I said. If the reporter's story runs, and Raymond's name is connected to shell company activity, Raymond wants the estate transfer completed and the money moved before anyone starts pulling threads. I started pacing the road, shoulder 4 steps, turn 4 steps, the way I paced the cave. But Derek can't accelerate. He doesn't have a death certificate. He can't file for estate transfer without confirmed death or a court declaration of presumed death, and that process takes months. So Raymond is pushing on a door that Derek cannot open yet, and Derek knows it, and that friction is going to get louder. That's exactly what I believe, Walter said. And loud friction between two men who have committed conspiracy to commit murder tends to produce documentation. He tilted his head. People say things in anger they would never put in writing during calm planning. If Raymond and Derek start fighting, they start making calls, sending messages, things that leave traces a competent investigator can find, or a competent judge can subpoena, I said. Walter almost smiled. Or that. I stopped pacing. Walter, I need Judge Patricia Coleman. Walter blinked. Patricia Coleman, your former colleague on the circuit. She's on the district court now, handling complex civil and criminal matters. She is the most methodical, unimpeachable jurist in this county, and she has hated sloppy procedure her entire career. I looked at him steadily. If I walk into her chambers with 31 pages of bank transfers and conspiracy emails and a handwritten blackmail note, she will not ask me why I didn't go to the police sooner. She will ask me whether the chain of custody is clean. And I can tell her exactly how the evidence was found, where it has been, and who has handled it. She'll want to know you're alive, Walter said. She'll be the third person who knows, I said. You, Marcus, and Patricia, that's the circle. Nobody else until we're ready to move. I looked at him. Can you get me a meeting with her off the record? Not at the courthouse. Walter was quiet for a moment, working through it. Patricia has a lake house on Lake Julian. She goes there on weekends alone, no staff. I can reach her through a channel Derek won't be monitoring. He paused. Arthur, once Patricia Coleman is in this, it moves fast. She is not a woman who sits on actionable evidence. Good, I said. I don't want to sit on it either. I've been sitting on it in a cave for 12 days, and I am running out of patience. Walter pulled out his phone and started composing a message. Then he stopped. The person following me, he said. When I drive back into Asheville today, he'll be back on me within a mile. Let him follow you, I said. Go about your normal business. Go to the hardware store. Go home for dinner. Let Derek see a man who is slowing down. Let him think the surveillance is working. I paused. And Walter, don't go near Marcus. Not for a week. Derek cannot see any connection between you and Marcus until we are ready for him to see everything. Walter nodded, pocketed his phone, and opened the car door. Then he stopped one more time the way he always did when something was still unresolved. Marcus, he said. What are you going to do about Marcus? I thought about it. About the parking lot. About Marcus's hands fisted in the back of my shirt. About the sound he made when he saw me step out from behind the kiosk. Marcus made a terrible choice under terrible pressure, I said. He is going to have to answer for that. But he is going to answer for it in a courtroom with a lawyer through a process, not in a parking lot on Route 276. My voice steadied. He's my son, Walter. The law applies to him the same as it applies to Derek, and the same as it applied to every person who ever sat in front of me on that bench. Walter looked at me for a long moment. Then he got in the Buick and drove away. I stood on the road shoulder until the car disappeared around the bend, and then I turned back toward the tree line and began the long walk back up to the cave. Behind me, somewhere in Asheville, a man in a rental car was writing down Walter Simmons's license plate number and reporting back to Derek Hayes. And somewhere else in the city, Raymond Holt was picking up his phone for the 5th time in 2 days, his hands shaking about to make a call that was going to give us exactly what we needed. Walter reached Patricia Coleman through George Harwell, the retired bailiff who had worked her courtroom for 14 years, and who, when presented with the message, "Patricia Arthur Hayes is alive and needs 1 hour, tell no one," Lake Julian Saturday morning had replied within 10 minutes with, "She'll be there at 7," which was George Harwell's way of saying Patricia had already replied, and her reply had been yes without conditions. Walter drove me to Lake Julian on the morning of September 28th via 3 different routes, doubling back twice through the South Asheville neighborhoods before cutting west toward the water. By the time we reached her cabin, cedar-sided set back from the lake on a gravel drive lined with river birch, modest in the way that people with genuine authority are often modest about their spaces, I was reasonably certain we had come alone. Patricia was on the porch when we pulled in. Silver hair, practical cut. The posture of a woman who had owned every room she had entered for 40 years. She was holding a coffee mug in both hands, and watching our car with an expression I recognized the expression of a judge who has already begun forming questions. When I stepped out of the Buick, she went completely still for 3 full seconds. Then she set the mug on the porch railing, with extraordinary deliberateness, walked down the steps, crossed the gravel, and took my face in both hands, the way my mother used to when I came home from somewhere I shouldn't have been. "Arthur Hayes," she said, and her voice shook badly. "You impossible, stubborn man." "Patricia." My throat tightened. "I need your help." She released my face, pressed both palms against her own cheeks, drew one long, steadying breath, and said, "Get inside. Both of you, now." The cabin's main room held a pine table, 4 chairs, a wood stove already burning against the morning cold, and the particular quiet of a place where serious people go to think seriously. Patricia sat across from me. I put the waterproof case on the table and opened it. Then I reached into the field jacket Walter had brought me 2 weeks ago and produced the accordion folder, 2 separate items on the pine table between us. Patricia looked at them, then at me. "2 sources," she said. "2 sources," I confirmed. "Different origins, different chains of custody covering 2 entirely separate criminal operations. I need you to read both before we discuss either." Patricia put on her reading glasses. She picked up the document sleeve from the waterproof case first. She read the way she presided with absolute concentration, face giving away nothing. She turned each page with the deliberate care of someone who understands that paper can be evidence, or it can be just paper, and the difference is in how it is handled. She read all 31 pages of the Derek Raymond email chain, the bank transfers, the blackmail note to Marcus. When she finished, she set it aside and picked up the accordion folder. She opened the service agreement. I watched her face. For 12 pages, she gave me nothing. Then she reached the payment schedule, 3 tranches, $250,000 total, for what the agreement called persuasion and compliance facilitation, and the muscles around her eyes tightened almost imperceptibly. She read the surveillance photographs, the vehicle transcripts. The entry dated April 23rd, client advised to suspend approach, subject to alert, alternative method under discussion. She read Derek's handwritten note. "If direct approach continues to fail, we move to Plan B. No more outside parties. Cleaner that way. M is already on board for the party logistics." Patricia set down the last page. She squared both stacks separately, keeping them apart. She removed her reading glasses. She set them on the table with a precision that meant her hands needed something controlled to do. "Chain of custody," she said. "Walk me through both sources separately." "The waterproof case," I began, "found on the cave floor on the night of September 15th, in the outer chamber of a limestone cave in Pisgah, Sector 4. I held it through the night, opened it at first light on the 16th. In my continuous possession since, with one transfer to Walter Simmons on September 19th. For photography purposes, Walter can provide a sworn statement. The accordion folder, Patricia said, found inside a hard-shell suitcase in the collapsed inner chamber of the same cave. I said. The suitcase belonged to a criminal organization hired by Derek Hayes under a service agreement dated February 14th, 2025. The organization's principals are 3 men now deceased in the inner chamber. I accessed the inner chamber on the morning of September 16th, removed the accordion folder, and left everything else, including the suitcase and its remaining contents, exactly as found. The folder has been in my continuous possession since. Patricia pressed 2 fingers against her lips. Her eyes were very bright. February 14th, she said. 7 months before the birthday party. 7 months, I confirmed. The Georgia operation and the Raymond Holt financial structure ran simultaneously, 2 independent tracks toward the same objective, which means, Patricia said slowly, that the premeditation documented here is not the 6 weeks of birthday planning. It is 7 months of layered conspiracy involving at minimum 2 separate criminal organizations, 4 individual participants, and a documented attempt to commit extortion against you that preceded the attempted murder by 5 months. That is my reading, I said. Patricia stood up. She walked to the wood stove and stood with her back to it, arms crossed, looking at the 2 stacks of documents on the pine table, with the expression of a judge who has seen a great deal and is currently recalibrating her understanding of what a great deal means. Arthur, she said, what you have on that table is not just enough for an arrest. It is enough for a federal prosecution that will occupy a courtroom for the better part of a year. She paused. The service agreement, combined with the deaths of the 3 contractors, opens the question of whether Derek Hayes is responsible not only for your attempted murder, but for 3 additional homicides. The wood stove ticked. Outside, Lake Julian caught the morning light. That determination belongs to the FBI, I said. Not to me. Agreed, Patricia said. She crossed back to the table and held out her hand. I will take custody of both document sets as of this moment. Documented, time-stamped, witnessed by Walter Simmons. She looked at me steadily. And Arthur, I need you to be ready to move faster than 2 weeks if the evidence around the contractor deaths accelerates FBI involvement. That is not a timeline I can control. I understand, I said. I handed her the sealed white envelope, last the one addressed to Derek's office on Lexington Avenue, with 3 words inside. Patricia turned it over, read the address. What's inside? 3 words, I said. I found it. Patricia stared at the envelope for a long moment. Then a sound escaped her short, involuntary fierce, and she pressed her hand over her mouth, and her eyes went brilliant with something that was equal parts satisfaction and controlled fury. He'll go to the cave, Walter said from his chair. Yes, I said. And he'll find the outer chamber empty, and he'll know that someone has both sets of documents, and he will not know who, and he will not know how, and he will stop being careful. Patricia set the envelope on top of the 2 document stacks, straightened, and held out her hand. I shook it. Her grip was firm and dry and absolutely certain. 2 weeks, Arthur, she said. Don't make me wait longer than that. The envelope reached Derek's office on the morning of October 1st. I knew because Marcus called Walter's backup phone at 11:47 that morning, the number Derek didn't know about, and his voice was tight with barely controlled urgency. Derek got a letter, Marcus said. I was at the office dropping off some paperwork when it came in with the morning mail. He opened it right in front of me, and Walter, I mean. He caught himself remembering to be careful even now. The look on his face. I have never seen Derek look like that. He went white. Completely white. His hand was shaking, and he folded the letter back up so fast the paper tore. Walter relayed this to me that evening, when he came to the cave, and I sat on the cave floor, with my back against the limestone wall, and felt something I had not allowed myself to feel in 16 days' satisfaction. Clean, cold, and entirely earned. What did he do? I asked. Left the office at noon, Walter said. Drove toward Pisgah. I had Marcus watching his car tracker. Derek had a GPS unit installed on Marcus's car after the birthday party to monitor his movements, and Marcus returned the favor last week by putting a magnetic tracker on Derek's rear axle. Walter allowed himself the smallest possible smile. Derek drove to the Pisgah Sector 4 fire road, stayed 40 minutes, came back. He found the empty cave, I said. He found the empty cave, Walter confirmed. I closed my eyes for a moment. I could picture it exactly, Derek pushing through the rhododendron, ducking into the cave entrance, crossing to the far wall where the case had been finding nothing but limestone and dead leaves. The particular cold of understanding that the thing you believed was your secret has become someone else's weapon. Good, I said. How did he look when he came back? Marcus said he came into the estate at 2 o'clock and went straight to his study and closed the door. An hour later, Raymond Holt arrived. I opened my eyes. Raymond came to the house, walked right up the front drive, Walter said. Which tells you how frightened he was, because Raymond Holt has been meticulous about keeping visible distance from Derek for 6 months. Any meeting they've had has been through intermediaries or encrypted messaging. Raymond showing up at the estate in the middle of the afternoon means he has run out of patience for careful. Walter pulled out his phone and brought up a text message Marcus had sent him at 4:15 that afternoon. Marcus had positioned himself in the upstairs hallway near the study door, close enough to hear, far enough to look incidental if Derek came out. He had typed what he heard in real time, imperfect and fragmented, sent in pieces. I read it off Walter's screen. Raymond, the letter who sent it. How does someone have the case? Derek, I don't know yet. Keep your voice down. Raymond, you told me it was secure. You told me nobody goes up that ridge. Derek, nobody does. Something went wrong. I'm handling it. Raymond, handling it. Raymond, the reporter at the Citizen Times, requested my financial records this week. My personal records. Derek, not just the LLC. If she connects me to the shell company, and then someone connects the shell company to the estate transfer. Derek, the estate transfer has not happened yet. There is nothing to connect. Raymond, yet. I want out. I want my name off every document. I want the Delaware entity dissolved, and I want... Derek, you want. Raymond, you do not get to want anything right now. You are in this because you chose to be in this. Raymond, I chose to help you manage a financial transition. I did not choose what happened in that forest, was not what I agreed to. Loud noise. Something breaking. Derek, lower. Your voice. I handed the phone back to Walter. My hands were steady. My chest was not. Raymond is separating himself from the attempt on my life, I said. He's building a narrative where he was only the financial architect, where he didn't know Derek intended to kill me, only to facilitate an estate transfer. Which may or may not be true, Walter said carefully. It doesn't matter whether it's true, I said. What matters is that Raymond believes that distinction will protect him, and the moment he believes that he becomes a flight risk. If Raymond decides his best option is to go to law enforcement first and offer himself as a witness in exchange for reduced exposure, he takes control of the narrative before we do, Walter finished. Exactly. I stood up, pressing my hand against the cave wall for balance. My legs had gotten considerably stronger over 3 weeks of walking the ridgeline daily, but the cold still got into the joints. Walter, I need to move the timeline. Not drastically, but I cannot give Raymond Holt 2 more weeks to decide that cooperation with a prosecutor is better than exposure. How long do we have? Walter asked. I don't know. But Marcus needs to keep listening, and I need you to tell Patricia that our 2 weeks may have become 10 days. I looked at him directly. Can you reach her tonight? Yes, Walter said. Arthur, there's one more thing, Marcus said. He paused, and the pause was weighted. After Raymond left, Derek called someone. Marcus couldn't hear the conversation, but he heard Derek say one name clearly before he closed the study window. Whose name? Walter met my eyes. "Gerald Sykes," he said, "the deputy medical examiner." The implications of that landed in my chest like a stone dropped into still water, and I felt the ripples move outward through everything I thought I understood about our timeline. "Derek is trying to accelerate the death certificate," I said. "Without a body, he's calling in the favor Raymond arranged." "That's what I believe," Walter said quietly. "Arthur, if Sykes files a death certificate without a recovered body, Derek can move on the estate within 60 days under North Carolina probate law. He doesn't need a court declaration of presumed death if he has a medical examiner's certificate." I pressed both hands flat against the limestone wall and leaned there, jaw clenched, breathing through the implications. "Then we don't have 10 days, I said. "No," Walter agreed. "We don't. Call Patricia tonight," I said. "Tell her the warrant needs to be ready in 72 hours, and tell Marcus to document everything he hears, everything he sees, every movement Derek makes." I pushed off the wall. "Raymond Holt is about to make his move. When he does, I want us already moving faster." Walter left. The cave held its cold around me, and somewhere below in the city, two men who had planned my death were now planning their own separate escapes from the consequences of it. The difference between them and me was simple. I had 31 pages of documents, a district court judge, a former private investigator, and a son who had finally, at terrible cost, chosen the right side. Derek had a broken alliance and a name he'd said too loudly in front of a closed study window. Patricia moved faster than I expected, and after 11 years of watching her run a courtroom, my expectations of Patricia Coleman were already considerably higher than most people's. By the morning of October 2nd, Walter drove me south toward Arden before sunrise on back roads still dark and quiet. Not to the courthouse, to a Presbyterian fellowship hall off Airport Road that a retired pastor had opened at 6 a.m., with no questions asked and no record kept. Patricia was already at the folding table with a legal pad. Beside her sat a woman I did not recognize, early 50s, dark hair, cut short, blue blazer, the economy of movement that belongs to federal law enforcement. She stood when I walked in. "Special Agent Diana Reeves, FBI Asheville Resident Agency. Judge Coleman briefed me last night." She studied me the way investigators study a witness they've already formed conclusions about. "Judge Hayes, you look better than a man living in a cave for 17 days has any right to." "Stubbornness," I said. "It's kept me alive since 1957. She almost smiled. "Sit down. I have questions." I walked her through everything: the birthday party, the 2 glasses of wine, Walter's warning Marcus in the doorway, the floor rising to meet me. 20 minutes without interruption. Agent Reeves understood that stopping a witness in full flow costs more than it gains. "The documents," she said. "Both sets. I need the originals." I placed the document sleeve on the table, then the accordion folder. Side by side, deliberately separate. 2 containers. 2 entirely independent evidentiary chains. The document sleeve from the outer chamber, Derek and Raymond's dead, dropped their own correspondence turned against them. The accordion folder from the collapsed inner chamber, the contractor's insurance policy never meant for anyone's eyes but their own. Clearly distinguished from the first moment of federal review, exactly as Patricia and I had agreed. Agent Reeves pulled on latex gloves and went through the document sleeve first. The Derek Raymond email chain. The bank transfers. The blackmail note to Marcus. On page 13, the email where Derek wrote, "Make it look like stroke or exposure. The ME owes Raymond 2 favors." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She set it aside and opened the accordion folder. She read the service agreement dated February 14th, 2025, fast and carefully. Payment schedule, surveillance photographs. The vehicle transcript from April 9th, we show him the paperwork and tell him if he doesn't sign things get difficult for the people he cares about. She looked up. "February 14th, she said. 7 months before the birthday party," I said. Meridian Facilitation Group, the Georgia LLC. Walter pulled the registration. Carter Voss, sole managing member, Walter said from his chair by the door. Extortion 2018, assault 2015. Voss and two associates, Greer and Dobbs, were reported missing to his Georgia parole officer in June 2025, 6 weeks after Derek terminated the service agreement. The fellowship hall held its quiet for a moment. 3 sets of remains in the inner chamber, Agent Reeves said. Not a question. I did not disturb them, I said. The suitcase, the money, the gold I left exactly as found. I took only the accordion folder. She removed her gloves. Judge Hayes, what you've given me this morning constitutes probable cause for a federal indictment, conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder. Financial elder abuse, wire fraud, obstruction, and misappropriation of client funds. The service agreement and the deaths of Voss, Greer, and Dobbs open a parallel homicide investigation. I need a forensic team in that cave within 72 hours. Patricia can sign the warrant, I said. Already drafted, Patricia said without looking up. I want Derek arrested at the appointment hearing, I said. In that commission room, in front of the committee and the press and every person he spent 2 months performing grief for. My voice hardened. Not for revenge, for the public record, so that everyone who watched him perform that grief understands exactly what they were watching. Agent Reeves looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at me. 3 weeks, Agent Reeves said. Wiretap subpoenas, forensic accounting, the cave team, and Gerald Sykes. She stood and shook my hand. Stay out of Asheville, stay out of contact, and stay alive. The last item is most important. She left. Patricia pressed both hands flat on the table and leaned there, head down, allowing herself one moment to feel everything she had been holding at professional distance. Arthur, she said quietly, when this is over, take a real vacation. Savannah, I said. Eleanor always wanted to go back. Patricia lifted her head. Her eyes were bright and wet. Then go, she said. Stay as long as you need. My throat closed so tightly I simply nodded. She understood. We left it there. Raymond Holt walked into the FBI Asheville Resident Agency office on the morning of October 5th without an appointment and without a lawyer, and told the woman at the front desk that he had information about a conspiracy to commit murder and wanted to speak with whoever was in charge. I did not witness this directly. I was in the cave, which had become over the course of 3 weeks less a place of survival and more a place of strategy. I had a wool blanket. Walter had brought me a small battery-powered lantern, the documents, a legal pad, and a pencil. I had maps of Asheville that I had been annotating for 10 days. The cave smelled like lantern fuel and old leaves and purpose. Walter called Marcus's backup number at noon. Marcus relayed what he'd heard, and Walter drove up to the Route 276 trailhead that evening and delivered it all to me while the lantern threw our shadows long against the cave walls. Raymond went in alone, Walter said, settling onto the rock shelf across from me. No attorney, which means he either panicked so badly he forgot you always bring a lawyer, or he made a deliberate calculation that walking in voluntarily and early before anyone subpoenaed him gives him maximum cooperation credit. Walter paused. My money is on the second. Raymond Holt is frightened, but he is not stupid. What do we know about what he told them? I asked. Marcus overheard a phone call Derek's side only. Derek called Raymond at 2 in the afternoon, and whatever Raymond said, Derek's response was loud enough to come through a closed door. Walter's jaw set. Marcus said Derek used language he had never heard from him before. Then Derek said very clearly, "You just signed your own death warrant, Raymond." And then he hung up. My chest tightened. He threatened him on a phone that Agent Reeves almost certainly already has under wiretap authorization, Walter said, and the satisfaction in his voice was quiet and absolute. Derek made a death threat on a monitored line, Arthur. Whatever Raymond told the FBI this morning, Derek just added a witness intimidation charge to his own file. I pressed my fist against my mouth. My eyes were burning not from grief this time, but from the concentrated effort of containing something that wanted very badly to be relief and wasn't quite there yet. Where is Marcus now? At the hotel. Derek called him 20 minutes after the Raymond call and told him to stay in his room, not to speak to anyone, not to answer his phone except for Derek's number. Walter looked at me directly. Arthur, Derek is beginning to understand that the perimeter is collapsing. He doesn't know about the FBI meeting with Patricia. He doesn't know about you. But he knows Raymond has broken, and he knows someone has the documents, and he is starting to calculate his options. Flight, I said. That's my read. Has he moved any money? Marcus accessed Derek's personal laptop Tuesday night, while Derek was in the shower. Derek has always used the same password, their mother's birthday, which Marcus knew, and Derek apparently forgot that Marcus knew. Walter pulled out his phone and read from a note Marcus had sent. Derek logged into 2 offshore accounts Tuesday, Cayman Islands and Isle of Man. Combined balance just under $2 million. He didn't transfer anything, but he checked the balances and the wire transfer interface. I stood up. The lantern swayed slightly, throwing the shadows in new directions. He's deciding whether to run, I said. He hasn't decided yet. If he'd decided, he would have transferred. He's still calculating whether he can hold the position, finish the nomination, complete the estate transfer, and get out cleanly. I started pacing, 4 steps to the wall, 4 steps back. He thinks he still might be able to win this. That's the most dangerous version of Derek, and not the Derek who panics and runs, but the Derek who believes that with enough precision and pressure, he can still engineer the outcome he wants. What does that mean for us? Walter asked. It means the person following you becomes more aggressive, I said. Derek needs to know what Walter Simmons knows. He needs to understand the shape of what's coming for him. And that means the surveillance escalates. I stopped pacing. Walter, I need you to give the surveillance something to follow. Something that takes them away from this ridge, away from Marcus, away from anything real. Walter considered this for a moment. There's a storage facility I use on the south end of town. I've been in and out of it legitimately for years, old case files, equipment. I can start making trips there. Make it look like I'm building something, transferring materials. Give whoever Derek has watching me a target that keeps them occupied and moving in the wrong direction. Yes, I said. Do that starting tomorrow. I sat back down. And Walter, Agent Reeves needs to know that Derek is checking offshore accounts. That adds a flight risk dimension to the federal case. She can move on asset freezing through the courts without tipping Derek that we know. I'll reach her tonight through Patricia, Walter said. He paused. There's one more thing. Marcus. Something in his voice made me look at him more carefully. Derek called Marcus back at 4 o'clock this afternoon, Walter said. Calmer that time. Controlled. The way Derek always sounds when he's made a decision. Walter's eyes met mine steadily. He told Marcus that some things had become complicated, and that Marcus needed to be a team player. He used that phrase specifically, team player. And he told Marcus that if Marcus was a team player, everything Marcus had done would be protected, buried. That he'd make sure the $90,000 was untraceable, and Marcus walked away clean. My jaw tightened until I could feel it in my temples. He's trying to lock Marcus back down. He's afraid Marcus will break, Walter said. And he's right to be afraid. How did Marcus respond? Walter allowed himself a small, quiet smile. Marcus said, "Of course, Derek, whatever you need." And then he immediately texted me everything Derek had said word for word. Something cracked open in my chest, not pain, not grief, but something warm and solid and deeply, irreversibly grateful. I pressed my hand flat against my sternum and held it there for a moment. "That's my boy," I said quietly. And my voice, for the first time in 20 days, did not shake at all. Walter stood. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder. 10 days, Arthur. Agent Reeves said 3 weeks, and it's been 2. Raymond's cooperation is going to accelerate her timeline. Derek is checking offshore accounts. Gerald Sykes came in voluntarily for an interview this morning. Marcus found out through a courthouse contact. Sykes hasn't signed anything for Derek yet, and he's already talking to federal investigators. He paused at the cave entrance. Everything is moving toward the same point. The appointment hearing, I said. The appointment hearing, Walter confirmed. November 3rd. Patricia confirmed the committee date this afternoon. I looked at the lantern on the cave floor, its small, steady flame holding the dark back from the walls. 28 days, I said. 28 days, Walter agreed. He pushed through the rhododendron and was gone. I sat in the cave with the lantern and the maps and the annotated legal pad, and outside in Asheville, a man who had planned my death was staring at 2 offshore account balances and trying to decide if he could still win. He could not. But he didn't know that yet. Walter arrived on this morning of October 8th carrying a thermos of real coffee and the expression of a man who had watched a chess piece land exactly where he predicted it would. Raymond signed, he said before he'd cleared the rhododendron curtain. I set down my legal pad. When? Yesterday afternoon. Full cooperation agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Every date, every transfer, every communication between himself and Derek. He handed me the thermos cap with the matter-of-fact generosity of 30 years of friendship. And he confirmed something the documents couldn't give us. Derek drove you himself, his car, his hands, alone. Said he couldn't risk a third party who might talk. I held the thermos and breathed through what that did to my chest. My own son had put me unconscious in the back of a vehicle and driven me into these mountains in the dark. Not a proxy. Not a contractor. Derek himself. What else? I said when I trusted my voice again. My hands were shaking. I let them shake. The FBI cave team went in 3 days ago. Patricia signed the warrant Wednesday morning. Walter checked his notes carefully. $340,000 in bundled currency. 7 gold bars confirmed. 3 sets of remains, Voss through dental records, Greer and Dobbs through DNA, cross-referenced with Georgia state records. He paused. The forensic team found something in the collapse material. The lead investigator described the primary fracture pattern as, he read precisely, inconsistent with natural structural failure. Someone who understood structural engineering applied targeted force to a specific load-bearing section. The ceiling came down in exactly the right place to seal the inner chamber. The cave felt very cold around me. Derek sealed them in, I said. That is where the evidence is pointing, Walter said carefully. 3 murder counts will be added to the federal indictment within 10 days. I pressed my fist hard against my mouth. 3 men hired, used, then sealed inside a Carolina mountain, so Derek could clean up Plan A before he executed Plan B on my birthday. The same hands that poured my wine that night had brought a limestone ceiling down on 3 human beings 6 weeks before. Raymond's statement, I said, pulling myself back. What else did he give them? Derek's exact words on record. Walter's voice was flat with controlled anger. The estate money was seed funding. Once I had the bench, the real leverage came from the position itself. He paused. Derek also deleted 3 email accounts the day after Raymond signed his professional account, the Gmail used in the conspiracy emails and a Proton mail registered under a false name we didn't previously know existed. He allowed the smallest possible smile. Agent Reeves had mirrored all 3 accounts before Derek touched them. Everything he deleted is sitting on FBI servers right now, and deleting evidence under an active federal investigation is obstruction of justice, I finished. Another charge. Franklin Whitmore at Derek's firm came in voluntarily Tuesday. Derek moved $340,000 from client trust funds across 4 transfers. Derek got sloppy. He got frightened, Walter corrected. Frightened men always get sloppy, especially careful men who become frightened because they know exactly how much they stand to lose. Patricia signed a passport hold order yesterday. Derek tried to book London on October 21st. Declined at the airline level. He hasn't tried again. Walter looked at me steadily. Marcus is documenting every call Derek makes. Every single word. Since the morning after Route 276. That warm, solid thing moved through my chest. I pressed my hand flat against my sternum and held it there. 26 days, I said. 26 days. Walter confirmed and went back down through the trees. Outside, Derek Hayes was checking offshore account balances and calculating whether he could still win. He could not. On the morning of October 27th, 42 days after they left me for dead in Pisgah National Forest, I walked out of the cave for the last time. I stopped at the entrance and looked back the limestone walls, the rock shelf, the stacked ration tins, the legal pad covered in my handwriting. 31 tins remained. I left them for the FBI evidence team. Beside the rhododendron curtain, a small orange federal marker stake stood planted in the ground. Agent Reeves had kept her word. You kept 3 men's secrets, I said, to the cave, to the mountain, to whatever old places hold, when enough human weight has passed through them. Then you kept mine. I won't forget that. I pushed through the rhododendron and went down the slope. Walter was at the trailhead, with the Buick running and the heat on. When I came out of the tree line, his throat moved. He pressed his lips together and nodded once, then opened the passenger door from Walter Simmons, the full, emotional declaration. Patricia's house, I said. Patricia's house, he said, and we drove. Patricia met us at the door, with a cardigan, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and that brisk, controlled energy she has worn so long. The discipline and the emotion have become indistinguishable. Guest room is made up. Real food in the kitchen, not military rations. Agent Reeves is here at 4. We have work to do. Patricia, I said. She stopped. Thank you for all of it. She put her hand briefly against my cheek, one quick, certain gesture, and said, Eat something first. You look like a closing argument without a conclusion, and went to the kitchen. Agent Reeves arrived at 4 with Agent Torres. They spread files across Patricia's dining room table, and the briefing covered everything. Raymond Holt's cooperation agreement is signed, Reeves said. 3 offshore accounts now fully identified, including the 2 Cayman and Isle of Man accounts previously accessed, and a 3rd in Luxembourg traced this week. Combined total just under 3 million. Asset freeze signed this morning. The cave, I said. Voss, Greer, and Dobbs are confirmed. Forensic analysis of the collapse indicates deliberate structural compromise, targeted destabilization. She met my eyes. 3 counts of first-degree murder have been added to Derek's indictment. Their families, I said. Greer's sister and Augusta Dobbs's daughter in Macon both notified. They deserve to be found, Judge Hayes. They did, I said. Torres reported Derek's passport flagged after a declined London booking on October 21st, offshore accounts accessed 3 times that week. He's calculating, Torres said. He won't run, I said. Derek still believes he can win. Men like that don't run. Running admits defeat. Marcus had retained Sandra Pruitt and reached a cooperation agreement. No prison time if testimony was complete. I requested he be told the full truth about Voss, Greer, and Dobbs before he took the stand. Reeves agreed. November 3rd, I said. I want to be in that room when Derek walks in. Reeves studied me. That is a significant operational complication. I waited 42 days, I said. I think I've earned the right to be in the 2nd row. A long moment. Then I'll make it work. 7 days. I had waited 42. 7 more was nothing at all. We left Asheville before 4 in the morning, Walter and I in the Buick, Patricia following close behind. The mountains were dark shapes against a darker sky, and neither of us spoke much. Everything had been planned. What remained was the doing of it. The North Carolina Judicial Nominating Commission hearing was held in a 4-floor stone and glass building on Morgan Street in downtown Raleigh. Agent Reeves met us in a side corridor, with Agent Torres and two U.S. Marshals dressed in civilian clothes, but their posture told anyone with sense exactly who they were. Derek left Asheville at 5:42, Reeves said, ETA 8:30. She looked at me. How are you holding up? Ask me at 9:15, I said. We were inside our seats, second row, right side by 7:15. The hearing was scheduled for 9. At 8:45, Walter leaned close. Marcus is here. I found him at the rear wall, Sandra Pruitt beside him, both of them still. Marcus was pale, jaw tight, hands clasped. He had learned about Voss, Greer, and Dobbs the previous night. I could see every ounce of that weight on his face. When his eyes found mine across the crowded room, his jaw worked for a moment, and then he gave one small, certain nod. I nodded back. My throat clenched so sharply I had to look away before I came undone right there. At 9 o'clock, the hearing room door opened. Derek walked in navy suit, white shirt, the burgundy tie Eleanor had given him 6 Christmases ago. Leather portfolio under his arm. Posture perfect. He scanned the gallery the way lawyers always do, left to right, face by face, and then his eyes landed on the second row. On me. The portfolio hit the floor. The crack of it silenced 30 conversations at once and rang off the stone walls in a way no one in that room would ever forget. Derek grabbed the back of the nearest chair. His knuckles went white. Dad. The word was barely a breath. Dad, you're alive, Derek, I said, and 40 years of judicial authority carried my voice across every corner of that room without a tremor. Alive since the night you drove me into Pisgah National Forest and left me in Sector 4 to die. The room erupted. Agent Reeves stood buttoned her jacket. The marshals moved. Derek James Hayes, the taller marshal said, voice cutting clean through the noise. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, financial, elder abuse, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, misappropriation of client trust funds, and 3 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of Carter Voss, James Greer, and Paul Dobbs. Derek turned to me. The cave. I found everything, I said. The service agreement, the photographs, the suitcase. All 3 men you sealed inside to protect yourself. I found it all, Derek. He looked at Marcus. Marcus was weeping openly, shoulders trembling, jaw shaking, but his eyes never left his brother's face. Not once. Derek looked at the floor. The marshals walked him out. Walter put his hand on my arm. I covered it with mine, pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of my nose, and breathed. It's done, Walter said quietly. Almost, I said, but we both knew the hardest part was finished. The law moved the way it moves when the evidence is airtight, and the defendants have nowhere left to go. Derek was held without bail. Flight risk, the magistrate ruled the offshore accounts, the London booking, $3 million in frozen assets. His attorney filed motions. They were denied. The evidence was what it was, and what it was everything. The 3 murder charges changed the character of the case in ways I had not anticipated, even with 40 years on the bench. Carter Voss, James Greer, and Paul Dobbs had been criminals. They had been hired to intimidate an old man into signing away his home. None of that was admirable. But they had been human beings with people who loved them, and they had been killed deliberately, calculatedly, because they had become inconvenient. The Citizen Times ran the story for 3 days. The national wire services picked it up by the end of the 2nd week. Derek Hayes became the kind of story people discuss over dinner in states where neither of us had ever set foot. I did not enjoy that. There is nothing enjoyable about watching your son become a cautionary tale that travels across a country. But I did not look away from it either. Raymond appeared in federal court on December 8th and read a prepared statement in a voice so unsteady the court reporter asked him twice to slow down. I was not there. I had read his emails. I knew what he was. Marcus appeared before Judge Elaine Hartley on December 12th with Sandra Pruitt standing solid beside him. He entered his cooperation agreement. He stood straight. He said, "Yes, Your Honor, and I understand, Your Honor," with the clarity of a man who has decided to face whatever comes next with his eyes open. Judge Hartley sentenced him to 3 years probation counseling and community service. No prison time. When she read the sentence, his hands pressed flat against the sides of his jacket, stopped shaking for the first time since Route 276. He said, "Thank you, Your Honor," in a voice that came out whole, and I pressed my fist against my mouth from 3 rows back and held it there. Afterward, in the courthouse corridor, he stood in front of me with red eyes and nothing prepared to say. "Dad, I don't have words for—" "Then don't use them," I said. "Today you just breathe." He held on. I held him back. Everything said nothing needed. At the sentencing, I was given 4 minutes at the podium. "On the evening of September 15th, 2025, my sons made choices intended to erase me," I said. "Not to take my property, to erase the fact of my continued existence. I did not disappear. I was forgotten temporarily by people who believed forgetting and erasing are the same thing. They are not. I spoke about Voss, Greer, and Dobbs by name. I asked the court to acknowledge that they were human beings who went into a mountain and did not come out, and that the man who sealed them there treated their lives as a logistical problem. That, I said, was the fullest measure of what Derek Hayes had become." Judge Hartley let me go 30 seconds over. On the drive home, Walter took the long way past the Hayes estate. The house was dark against the December ridgeline. "Keep it," I said before he could ask. "Eleanor and I built it 31 years ago. I'm going home, Walter." Opening the windows, putting her pot roast on the stove, watching the mountains on Sunday evenings the way we used to. "Savannah?" he asked after a mile. "Spring," I said. He nodded. The Blue Ridge moved past the windows in the dark. The same ridges that had hidden me for 42 days, the same forest that had kept its counsel around a limestone cave, while I read 30 pages of Betrayal by lantern light, and learned what I was made of when everything else was gone. I had been left for dead, and I had declined the invitation. A man is not what happens to him. A man is what he does next. I am still here. That is enough. That is everything. They ask me sometimes what kept me alive in that cave. Not the ration tins. Not the flashlight. Not even the accordion folder full of evidence that was going to bring my son to justice. What kept me alive was the belief that the truth has weight, that it does not dissolve in the dark. That God, and I say this as a man who has argued with God considerably over 68 years, does not waste a man's story before it is finished being told. I am not a perfect father. I was too certain, too trusting, too willing to believe that love was enough to hold a family together without tending to the cracks. If you see those cracks forming in your own life, tend to them. Do not wait until the floor gives way. Do not be like me. My personal belief earned the hard way: dignity is not something anyone can take from you. It can only be surrendered. And I did not surrender mine, not in that forest, not in that cave, not in that courtroom. If these grandpa stories have taught you anything, let it be this: the people who try to erase you are counting on your silence. Do not give it to them. This has been one man's family story, a real one, the kind that does not end neatly but ends honestly. If something in this grandpa stories, this family story, this grandpa stories moved you, stayed with you, made you think of someone you love, or someone you need to forgive, or someone you need to hold accountable, leave that in the comments. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that stories like this one matter, subscribe and stay close, because the next one is already waiting. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements crafted entirely for the purpose of meaningful storytelling. If that is not the content you are looking for, no hard feelings, step away and find what serves you best. But if you stay, I promise to make it worth your time.